Before you drift to sleep, comment down below where you're watching from. Let's dive into tonight's chilling stories. I pulled into the grocery store parking lot later than I had planned. The Thanksgiving rush had kept me out longer, and by the time I finished, the lot was mostly deserted. My cart was loaded with bags, and the icy November night air, typical of Chicago's cold embrace, nipped at my face as I made my way to my car. The only sound was the clatter of the cartwheels against the asphalt. As I approached, I noticed someone standing a few rows over, a man leaning against a car. He wasn't doing anything alarming, but something about the way he watched me made my skin crawl. I told myself I was being paranoid. He could just be waiting for someone. Still, I quickened my pace, my keys already in hand. As I unloaded the bags into my trunk, I glanced back. He had moved. He was closer now, casually walking in my direction. My heart skipped. I shoved the last bag into the car and slammed the trunk shut, fumbling to unlock the driver's side door. Sliding into the seat, I locked the doors with a shaky breath. I stared at the steering wheel, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Then I heard it. A deliberate crunch of footsteps on gravel, slow and purposeful. I dared to glance up and saw him, staring a few feet away from my car now, staring directly at me. I froze. My mind screamed at me to start the car, but my body refused to move. He didn't approach any closer, just stood there, his head tilted slightly, as if trying to decide what to do next. I reached for my phone, only to realize it wasn't in my pocket. Frantically, I searched the passenger seat and remembered I'd tossed it in one of the grocery bags. Great. My lifeline was buried somewhere in the back of my car. The man began to pace in front of my car, blocking my way forward. It felt like a sick game, him waiting for me to panic and make a mistake. My fingers hovered over the ignition, unsure whether to stay put or risk trying to drive around him. Then I remembered the emergency exit gate at the far side of the lot. It wasn't far, but it was my only option. My hands trembled as I started the car. The sound of the engine roared in the silence, making him stop pacing. He looked at me, realization dawning in his eyes. I threw the car into reverse, jerking it back hard enough to make my groceries slide across the trunk. He started toward me, but I didn't give him the chance to reach the door. I slammed the car into drive and sped toward the gate. The opening was narrow, and I winced as the side mirrors scraped against the metal post, but I didn't stop. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing at the edge of the parking lot, watching me leave. I didn't stop until I was back on a busy, well-lit street. My heart was still pounding, and my knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel. I glanced at the clock. It wasn't even midnight, and yet that parking lot felt like the most isolated place in the world. That night I learned how quickly a normal moment could turn into a nightmare. I don't know what his intentions were, and honestly, I don't want to. It only takes a second for everything to shift. And in those fleeting moments, your safety may rest entirely in your hands, long before help arrives. It was well past midnight when I finally decided to leave the bar after a night out with friends. The drinks had been flowing and I was ready to go home, but I couldn't help but feel a little disoriented as I stepped outside. The city felt different at this hour, quieter, emptier. I opened the Uber app on my phone and requested a ride. The app confirmed a driver was on the way, and a few minutes later, a black sedan pulled up. I didn't think much of it, but I made sure to double-check the car details to ensure it was the right one. The driver, a man in his late 40s with a nondescript appearance, greeted me with a polite smile. "Hey there, you headed to 5th Street?" he asked, his voice friendly enough. "Yeah, that's the one," I replied, sliding into the back seat. As we drove off, I could hear the soft hum of the engine and the faint background music playing from his radio. Everything seemed normal at first. He asked if I had a good night, and I gave him a casual response. The city lights blurred past as we cruised down the main roads, but I quickly noticed something odd. He wasn't following the usual route. I checked my phone's GPS. We were a couple of blocks off course. "Hey, are we still on the right track?" I asked, trying to sound casual but already feeling uneasy. The driver's grip on the wheel tightened slightly, and he glanced at me through the rearview mirror. That same friendly smile still plastered on his face. "Just a shortcut, trust me. I know a better way." I felt a chill run through me. The shortcut didn't feel right. The street signs were unfamiliar, and I could see the tall buildings of the city gradually giving way to darker, more deserted streets. "Okay," I said, trying to keep calm, though I was starting to feel more nervous. "Are you sure this is the way?" "Yeah, just relax," he said. "It's not too far now." The car turned down another narrow street. There were no other cars around, and the only lights were the dim street lamps, casting long shadows across the road. My phone was dying, and I couldn't get a signal. The isolation of the area was unsettling. A few minutes passed in silence before he spoke again. "Do you live alone?" His voice was casual, but the question hung in the air for too long. I hesitated, the question catching me off guard. Yeah, I answered. "Why?" "No reason," he replied, his eyes flicking briefly to the rearview mirror. But something in his tone made me uneasy. I glanced at my phone again, only to see that the GPS had frozen. Panic began to settle in. "I don't think we're on the right street anymore," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Can you just pull over?" His eyes locked onto the road ahead, no longer as friendly. "Almost there," he said, his voice low and steady, but the tension in it was unmistakable. I didn't feel safe anymore. I could feel my heart racing. I said, "Pull over." "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice louder now. He didn't respond. The car slowed as we approached an empty parking lot surrounded by trees. My mind raced, and I knew I had to act fast. As the car finally came to a stop, I unbuckled my seatbelt, swung the door open, and bolted out of the car. Later that night, when I finally got home, I opened the Uber app to report the driver. But when I checked the ride history, there was nothing. No record of the trip at all. I figured maybe it was a mistake, so I contacted Uber support. I didn't get an explanation from Uber, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe I'd gotten into the wrong car, or maybe the ride hadn't officially started in the app due to some technical glitch. Either way, I was lucky to have trusted my instincts and acted quickly. That night changed how I view rideshares forever. Now, I double-check every detail before getting into a car, because a moment of caution can make all the difference. Road trips were supposed to be fun, but this one was anything but. I was driving with my wife and our daughter Emma on our way to my in-laws' house for the weekend. We had been stuck in heavy traffic for hours, so when the GPS suggested a scenic detour, I eagerly took it. A peaceful drive through the countryside seemed like a great way to avoid the congestion. The sun was setting, casting golden light on the rolling hills and distant farmlands. The scenic route was exactly what we needed to calm down. We stopped to snap some photos of the sunset, but as we continued, the road started to narrow. The trees on either side grew taller, forming a canopy overhead, blocking out the last rays of daylight. It wasn't long before I noticed something strange. The GPS began to act up. It kept recalculating, and the map no longer showed clear paths ahead. I didn't think much of it at first, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, the landscape grew darker. and the isolation set in. "Tom, are you sure this is the right way?" my wife asked, her voice laced with unease. "Yeah, it's fine," I replied, trying to reassure her. "It's just taking us a little off the beaten path." "I'm losing signal," Emma said, her face twisted in concern as she stared at her phone. I tried to focus on the road, but the growing darkness was unsettling, and that's when I saw the headlights in the rearview mirror. At first I didn't think much of it, just another car taking the detour. But the car didn't pass us. It stayed behind, and it stayed far too close. "Why aren't they passing?" my wife asked again, her anxiety building. "I don't know," I said, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "Maybe they're lost too." But when I sped up, the car sped up with us. When I slowed down, it matched my pace. "Dad, it's still there," Emma whispered from the back seat, her voice tight with fear. I glanced in the mirror and saw the faint glow of the headlights. It was unnerving, but I tried to push it out of my mind. Suddenly, we came to a fork in the road. No signs. Nothing familiar. I chose left, hoping it would lead us somewhere. The headlights behind us followed without hesitation. "Tom, I don't like this," my wife said. "It's like they're following us on purpose." I tried to shake off the feeling, but the road ahead felt endless. The more I drove, the darker it became, until the woods felt suffocating, and the car seemed to close in on us. It was almost as though the world had shrunk to just the narrow road and that set of headlights in the rear view. And then, just as I was about to turn onto yet another dark, winding road, I saw it. A diner. A small neon sign flickered in the distance. I pulled into the parking lot, hoping the other car would pass us, but it didn't. The car slowed as it neared the diner, then stopped at the entrance for a few long seconds before speeding away into the night. We didn't move for a while. I was too afraid to get out of the car, too shaken to process what had just happened. But eventually, we got out, and I told the man behind the counter what had happened. He nodded as though he'd heard this story too many times before. "The road," he said, "has a bad reputation. You'll find folks get lost, their phones die, and sometimes you get followed. It's happened more times than I can count." We waited in the diner until we felt it was safe to leave. When we got back on the road, we ignored the GPS and stuck to the main highway. I still don't know who was driving that car or why they were following us, but I'll never trust a detour again. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, stay safe out there.